up not once, but twice, shaking neighbors on Detroit's west side.
While visiting that loved one's grave, they found a body. That person called police, and officers from the 8th Precinct came out to investigate.
5 innocent people have been shot with paintballs, 3 of them children.
A very real and dangerous situation. So-called paintball wars.
Police say the so-called paintball war began on social media as someone's idea to help stop the violence.
Detroit just did something nobody thought was possible. In 2024, the city recorded 203 homicides. To put that in perspective, we're talking about the lowest number since 1965. In 2025, the projections are even better, somewhere between 180 and 200 murders. Now, before you think this is just another feel-good story, let me give you the full picture. During the third quarter of 2025 alone, shootings dropped by 30%. Carjackings went down 25%. Robberies fell by 10%. These aren't small adjustments. This is a complete reversal of a trend that's been going on for decades. Here's the thing though. Detroit still ranks as the 7th most dangerous city in the United States. The violent crime rate sits at 2,057 incidents per 100,000 residents, which is 464% higher than the national average. Your odds of becoming a victim of violent crime are still 1 in 50. But here's what matters. While most major American cities saw crime tick upward, Detroit went the opposite direction with a 4% decrease. The homicide rate per 1,000 residents dropped from 0.6 inches 2023 to 0.4 inches 2025. So what's actually working? The city invested $50 million over 3 years in community programs. Mayor Mike Duggan's approach focused on partnerships rather than just throwing more cops at the problem. Programs like ShotStoppers and community violence intervention started producing measurable results. The Detroit Police Department implemented a data mapping system that identifies crime hotspots in real time, allowing them to reassign patrullas based on predictive algorithms rather than just reacting to calls. And then there are the neighborhoods themselves. Brightmoor, once known for daily arson attacks, started showing notable improvements. Franklin Park saw an 18% drop in assaults compared to 2023. Even Belmont, which still holds the unfortunate title of most dangerous neighborhood with 2,541 violent crimes per 1,000 residents, showed measurable progress. The city even shut down violent gas stations, like the Mobile station on McNichols, after repeated incidents put the community at risk. But here's what nobody's talking about. This transformation didn't happen by accident. To understand why these numbers matter so much, you need to know where Detroit came from. And that story starts in the darkest period of American urban history. That's the year Detroit hit its absolute peak of violence, with 714 homicides. To give you context, New York City had 2,245 murders that same year, but they had 7 million people. Detroit had barely 1 million residents and was producing nearly a third of New York's body count. The city earned its nickname as murder capital, and it wasn't hyperbole. But 1,990 wasn't an isolated spike. In 2002, during the height of the crack epidemic's second wave, Detroit recorded 601 murders. The streets were controlled by organizations like Black Mafia Family, which according to DEA estimates was moving $270 million worth of cocaine annually. Then you had Young Boys Inc., a gang that specifically recruited kids under 15 because they couldn't be charged as adults. These weren't street corner operations. These were sophisticated criminal enterprises with connections to the music industry for money laundering. The violence had roots that went way deeper than drugs, though. In 1967, Detroit experienced one of the deadliest urban riots in American history. It started with a police raid on an unlicensed bar on 12th Street. What followed was 5 days of chaos that left 43 people dead, resulted in 7,200 arrests, and caused $300 million in damage. The National Guard rolled tanks through the streets. Entire blocks burned to the ground. Over 1,400 buildings in areas like Brightmoor were destroyed and never rebuilt. The riot triggered what became known as white flight. In just 5 years, 30% of the white population left Detroit. By 1980, the city had lost nearly 500,000 residents. Property values collapsed. The tax base evaporated from $3 billion annually down to $800 million. Schools lost funding, infrastructure crumbled, and entire neighborhoods turned into ghost towns filled with abandoned houses that became perfect hideouts for criminal activity. Then came the knockout punch. the collapse of the auto industry. Detroit lost 200,000 jobs after the 2008 crisis. General Motors and Ford shut down plants in areas like Poletown East. The unemployment rate, which had been 8% in 1970, skyrocketed to 25% by 1982. When the city declared bankruptcy in 2013, there were 80,000 abandoned houses scattered across Detroit. Today, 70,000 vacant lots still serve as constant reminders of what was lost. Let's talk about Belmont. With 2,541 violent crimes per 1,000 residents, it holds the top spot for Detroit's most dangerous neighborhood. This used to be a working class area where auto workers raised their families. Now, 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. Multiple gang factions compete for control of the territory. In 2025, social media documented shootings at traffic stops in broad daylight. The violence isn't random. It's territorial, systematic, and tied to decades of economic collapse. Then there's Poletown East, sitting at number 2 with 1,874 violent crimes per 1,000 residents. The total crime rate hits 7,488 when you include property crimes. Here's the brutal history. In 1981, General Motors wanted to build a new plant. The city used eminent domain to displace 1,500 families. They demolished an entire Polish neighborhood, including a historic church. The plant operated for a while, then closed, leaving behind industrial ruins in a community that never recovered. Today, it's known for armed robberies that run 177% above the national average. Brightmoor has its own unique story. Locals call it Brightmo because at some point, the just disappeared from common pronunciation. During the 2000s, this neighborhood experienced arson attacks almost daily. The population collapsed from 23,775 residents in 1990 to just 12,836 by 2010, a 46% loss. Entire streets became rows of burned out shells. But here's the interesting part. In 2025, social media posts from residents started showing real improvements. Community gardens replaced vacant lots. Neighborhood patrols organized. It's not fixed, but it's fighting back. And then there's Fishkorn, which has one of the strangest origin stories. The neighborhood was originally named after Ephraim Fishkorn, a German immigrant who built over 7,000 homes in Detroit starting in 1913. But in 2003, somebody made a mapping error and spelled it Fishkorn. The mistake stuck, and now even longtime Detroiters use the wrong name. The neighborhood has the highest rate of pedestrians being hit by vehicles in the city, what experts call a function of dysfunction. With a median income of just $23,000, 59% below the national average, people can't afford reliable transportation and end up walking in dangerous areas. Mike Duggan became mayor in 2014 with a philosophy that went against everything traditional policing suggested. You can't arrest your way out of a crime problem. Instead of just adding more officers and making more busts, he focused on what he called partnerships. The ShotStoppers program became the centerpiece of this approach, intercepting conflicts before they escalated into shootings. Between the first and third quarters of 2025, this strategy contributed to that 30% drop in shootings and 25% reduction in carjackings. The investment? $50 million over 3 years, specifically for community programs. The Detroit Police Department backed this up with technology. Their records management system doesn't just track crimes after they happen, it predicts where they're likely to occur next. Using 911 calls and incident reports, algorithms identify hotspots in real time. Patrol units get reassigned based on data rather than instinct. In one case study, intensive patrolling on Evergreen Avenue led to a 40% reduction in murders. The criticism? Some neighborhoods feel over-policed while others get ignored. Then there's community violence intervention, or CVI. Here's the key insight. 68% of homicides in Detroit are retaliations. Somebody gets shot, their crew wants revenge, the cycle never ends. CVI employs ex-convicts and respected community leaders as mediators. These aren't cops, they're people who lived the life and got out. In Franklin Park during 2024, CVI documented preventing 12 revenge shootings through direct intervention. They literally talked people down from pulling triggers. Social media plays an unexpected role too. Posts on X throughout 2025 celebrated community bonds as a crucial factor in the turnaround. Residents document improvements and pressure city officials for more resources. But it cuts both ways. These same platforms get used to coordinate criminal activity. The police monitor social media, but try to respect privacy boundaries, walking a line between intelligence gathering and surveillance. The big question remains, though, is any of this sustainable without addressing the root causes? That's where the story gets more complicated. Between 1,930 and 1,968, banks practiced something called redlining. They literally drew red lines on maps around black neighborhoods and refused to issue mortgages or business loans to anyone living inside those boundaries. A 1,939 redlining map of Detroit shows that the areas marked in red match almost perfectly with today's most violent neighborhoods. No loans meant no investment, which led to deterioration, which drove out anyone who could afford to leave, which attracted crime. 70% of properties in those original redline zones now sit vacant. The riots of 1,942 and 1,967 weren't isolated incidents. They were flashpoints in a long racial conflict. In 1942, white mobs attacked black families trying to move into the Sojourner Truth Home's public housing project. In 1966, the Kercheval incident saw police arrest young black men for loitering at community centers, sparking 4 days of confrontations. But 1,967 was different. The National Guard killed 33 black civilians during 5 days of violence. Compared to similar riots in Watts and Newark, Detroit's was deadlier and more destructive. This triggered the white flight that continues to define Detroit. In 1950, the city had 1.85 million residents and 80% were white. By 2020, the population dropped to 639,000 and 78% were black. The tax revenue collapsed from $3 billion to $800 million annually. Schools lost funding and graduation rates fell to 72% compared to 88% nationally. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. White residents fled, citing safety concerns, which caused neighborhoods to collapse economically, which actually made them less safe. The relationship between police and the black community carries this history. In October 2025, an officer shot an unarmed woman, triggering massive protests. This echoes the 1,972nd stress program, Stop Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, which killed 22 civilians before being disbanded. Today, body cameras are mandatory as of 2023, and there are reconciliation initiatives where officers actually live in the neighborhoods they patrol. But the distrust runs deep, with 40% of crimes going unreported because residents fear police more than criminals. Black Mafia Family wasn't just another gang. Founded by the Flannery brothers in the 1,982nd, BMF moved $270 million worth of cocaine annually, according to DEA estimates. They had connections throughout the music industry. Using record labels to launder money, the Flannerys got arrested in 2005, but the organizational structure survived. In 2025, raids in the Dexter-Linwood neighborhood uncovered cells still operating under the BMF name. The empire never really died. It just went underground and fragmented. Young Boys Inc. took a different approach by specifically recruiting teenagers under 15. The logic was cold and calculated. Minors couldn't be charged as adults, so they made perfect drug runners. This created a culture where kids got their first arrest around age 14 and were considered veterans by 18. That culture persists today. In 2025, 40% of shooting arrests involve suspects under 25. The typical profile? School dropout, no father in the household, first encounter with police in middle school. Territory matters more than money in Detroit's gang culture. The phrase la gente de, followed by a surname, indicates family-based loyalty structures. Neighborhoods like Franklin Park get divided by specific streets. Crossing the wrong line can be a death sentence. Take Evergreen and I-96. That intersection marks a boundary between rival factions. In 2025, a drive-by shooting there left 2 men dead in broad daylight. A witness described a man in a ski mask getting out of an older model SUV and opening fire before speeding off. Nobody was surprised because everyone knew that corner was disputed territory. The weapon flow never stops. 90% of guns used in Detroit crimes come from outside Michigan. The routes are well established. Interstate 69 from Indianapolis, Interstate 75 from Columbus. Ohio gun shows don't require background checks, making them the primary source. Detroit police seize about 12,000 illegal firearms annually, but it barely makes a dent. The irony? Michigan has strict gun laws, but it's surrounded by states with loose regulations. It's like trying to stay dry while standing in a river. Let's be clear about something. The numbers don't lie. Going from 714 murders in 1990 to 203 inches, 2024 is undeniably real progress. But Detroit still ranks as the 7th most dangerous city in America. The violent crime rate of 2,057 per 100,000 residents remains 464% higher than the national average. So the question isn't whether things improved, it's whether this improvement will last, or if it's just a temporary dip before another spike. New Orleans went through something similar between 2012 and 2014. Crime dropped significantly before bouncing back up. Detroit's decline started in 2020, right when the pandemic hit. Some analysts argue that lockdowns temporarily disrupted criminal networks and street activity. The city wants credit for new policies implemented after 2020, but correlation doesn't equal causation. Maybe the timing was just lucky. Then there's the political angle. During his 2024 campaign, Trump mentioned the possibility of a federal takeover of Detroit's police. Mayor Duggan pushed back hard, insisting that local efforts deserve the credit. This created tension around a basic question: who actually turned things around? The data shows the decline started before most of Duggan's major initiatives were fully implemented. That doesn't mean the programs aren't helping, but it complicates the narrative of a brilliant strategy saving the city. Here's what nobody disputes. 80,000 abandoned houses still sit empty, serving as shelters for criminal activity. The unemployment rate remains at 8.2%, double the national average. A third of residents live in poverty. The high school graduation rate of 72% trails the national 88% significantly. These are the structural problems that feed crime. Without good schools and decent jobs, how do you sustain peace long term? And then there's the Cartier phenomenon, which perfectly captures Detroit's contradictions. Since the 1,980 seconds, Cartier eyeglasses called buffs have been a status symbol in the city. The most popular models cost $2,650 or more, with all-white buffies being the most coveted. Between 2012 and 2016, these glasses were connected to 9 homicides, 17 non-fatal shootings, and 2,158 robberies. In 2014, a man literally traded a watch and Cartiers to help hide a corpse. Here's the paradox. 40% of Detroit lives in poverty, but buffs remain a rite of passage. The glasses represent both aspiration and desperation, success and violence, the same duality that defines the entire city. So, here's our take. Detroit's success is relative. Less horrible isn't the same as good. The real achievement isn't the numbers themselves. It's the recognition that you can't just police your way out of urban violence. You need investment in communities, not just badges and guns. Other cities should learn from this, but also understand that Detroit's still fighting a battle that started a century ago. Each life saved matters. Each shooting prevented is a victory. But 203 deaths still means 203 families destroyed. The transformation is real, but calling it a miracle misses the point. It's hard work producing slow gains against overwhelming odds. That's the truth nobody wants to hear.